Today I've got 7 tips to make your electronic drum set not suck when playing live. That's coming up. What's up guys, Justin Greenwald here, welcome to 65 Drums. This is the place to keep on top of all things E-drum related, so consider subscribing if you haven't yet. Electronic drums are awesome. They're great for practice, they're great for playing live, they can be used in a million different situations. But if you've just been using your electronic drum set to practice at home and you haven't played out live with it yet, you're about to be surprised. Because if you don't do the right things, sometimes your tone can absolutely suck and you can wonder, is this drum set actually any good at all? I mean, I thought it was great. It sounded great through headphones, but now I'm playing out a set of PAs and it sounds like trash. Today I'm gonna give you 7 different strategies to get a more realistic sound out of your electronic drum sets. Tip number 1, you're probably going overboard on the ambience and reverb with your electronic drum module. Mid-tier to high-end electronic drum sets have vast amounts of control over reverb effects, over like virtual room size, virtual room wall texture, like there's all kinds of crazy things you can do. And when you're listening to this drum set in a dry environment, like a pair of headphones, I mean, you want to add a good amount of reverb and ambience to make it sound right. But when you start playing out of a sound system in a large room, it totally affects the sound of your drum set. The size of the room, the shape of the room, the wall texture, materials, and all that stuff that affects your drums. If you're going overboard on ambience effects, the sound can be a little bit too echoey, a little bit too distant, a little bit unfocused. It just sounds like you have a drum set in a giant arena. So my recommendation is just chill out with the ambience settings. On my Roland TD-30, it's got a handy little fader knob where I can adjust all the ambient settings at once, but you can go through manually and adjust all the individual parameters that make up your ambient section. Tip number 2, you need to re-EQ that drum set. Remember how I was talking about how things sound different in headphones and in PA systems and sound systems? This definitely happens with EQ as well. The problem with EQ, just like ambience, is that there are so many variables at play. If you EQ your drum set before you go to the gig, you've probably EQ'd that sound for the headphones you're listening out of, or the drum amp you're listening out of. You go to a medium or large size venue, it completely sounds different. I remember one time I had to drastically cut the lows a lot because I was just overloading the system. Unfortunately, that system did not have any subs and it was just blasting the sound man. So I had to cut the amount of lows I was giving way down, and it saved the tone of that Roland TD-30 drum module. For your situation, it could be totally opposite. For example, maybe you play out of Beats headphones all the time. Those Beats headphones lean a little more heavily towards the bassy side. When you get to the venue and you realize everything's EQ'd flat and your drum set sounds flat, you might have to increase the lows or increase the highs. You just need to play around with the EQ. This is the #1 thing on this entire list, by the way. A lot of drum sets sound terrible because they lack bass when they get to the venue just because of the way the speakers are arranged and the way the sound man is mixing everything. Now, you don't want to fight the sound man, obviously. Make subtle changes, but even subtle changes can save your drum sound if it sounds really sucky at the moment. Unfortunately, I'm giving really broad advice here because there are so many variables. Every sound system is different, every subwoofer, every speaker system, every PA system, they're all so different. Tip number 3 is to turn on the compressor effect on your electronic drum module. Unfortunately, not all electronic drum modules have this, but the higher end ones do, and it really improves the overall sound. A compressor makes the softer hits louder and the louder hits softer. It compresses the waveforms. It's hard to explain why this sounds better, but it just does. It makes it sound a little bit more punchy, and I don't have the vocabulary to explain why it sounds better. Mess around with the compressor effect on your drum module if you have it, or maybe the sound man will do that on his rack. Whatever you need to do, this is just another tool to make your electronic drums sound better. Number 4, unless you have a higher end drum module, you don't have direct outs coming from your drum set, which means you control which elements of your kit are the loudest. You set the levels of how loud the kick drum is versus the snare drum, how loud the snare drum is versus the ride cymbal. And this is where you need to chill out with the cymbal volume. I know a lot of drummers like me like to have loud hi-hats, loud crash cymbals, loud ride cymbals. We like to have a lot of volume in the cymbal department. Unfortunately, the sound man doesn't need all that. The audience doesn't need all that. Remember, you're only one instrument out of like 5 or maybe even 10, depending on how big the band is. There are a lot of different sonic things happening at once, and you need to have a cohesion. And cymbals end up being a little bit like white noise when they get combined with everything. So basically what you need to cut through the mix is the snare and the kick drum. Kick, snare, those are the 2 main elements of your drum set. Obviously the cymbals are vital to filling in everything in between those 2 instruments, but they are not the most important things. Your kick and your snare are, and that's what your sound man needs. And when you have the cymbals up too high, it just clutters up the whole sound of your drum set. Back down the cymbal volume if you're always maxing out all of those faders. And remember, the reason why you have to do all this mixing is because the sound man doesn't have any control. He can just turn you up and down, maybe add a compressor and EQ your sound a little bit. That's all the tools he has. You have to do all the individual mixing of the individual instruments. And even if you do have a drum module that has direct outs, let's be real, how many of us actually plug in a single cable for the kick, the snare, the crash cymbals, the toms? Those are a ton of cables and a lot of connections that a lot of drummers just forego, and they just go out of the master outs instead, even if they have the capability of doing direct outs. A lot of times, most drummers just use direct outs for recording purposes. Or maybe I'm just in the minority. I don't know. That's just the way I see it. Tip number 6, choose a balanced kit. You might have this favorite kit. Let's say it's kit number 7. It's the best kit in the entire drum module, so you think. But in reality, it's only the best kit in the entire drum module when you're listening through headphones. When you listen out of a PA system, the thing sounds like trash. That's why you need to cycle through your kits and find the one that best suits the room you're sitting in. There are times when a kit that you never even thought of playing with before just sounds good in that room. Really hard to explain, but just sometimes it feels right for that venue. So you might have to use a kit you generally don't use. Some drummers, they just want to live or die by their one favorite drum set in that drum module, and they're just going to tweak it and try to save that one sound. If you just open up your options a little bit, cycle through some of the other kits in the drum module that you don't generally use, a lot of possibilities open up. Tip number 7. Drum software should be in your arsenal. If you've watched my channel for any length of time, you know that I love drum modules, and I'd rather spend the time to get a good drum module and then edit those sounds to make them sound good than have to lug around a laptop all the time and all the knowledge and expertise and work that goes into those things. But in reality, a laptop with a good VST like Easy Drummer, Addictive Drums, Superior Drummer, Steven Slate Drums. When you use great drum software on your laptop and you use your drum module just to trigger MIDI information to send to the laptop, letting the laptop generate the actual drum sounds, you'll always get a better tone. Your laptop has more processing power, the samples are way higher quality. Drum software is a great alternative to always relying on drum module sounds. And again, you get a better sound out of them 99% of the time. Even if you don't want to rely on it and you want to use your drum module sounds 99% of the time, you should at least buy Easy Drummer. It's $100, just go download it. You don't even need a DAW or anything like that. If you're already on board with this concept, you've got drum software, you just want to know how to use it live, there are a couple of ways to get the sound from your laptop to the sound man. One way, really simple, is to get a PCI direct box. That way you can plug straight from your headphone jack into one of these guys, and then this goes from XLR to the cable snake. Another option is to get a Radial USB Pro 2. This goes straight from USB from your laptop straight to 2 XLRs, right and left. And it has a ground lift as well, so does this PCI direct box. But the problem with these two methods is that there's no way to really monitor what you're hearing, so you would probably just plug your headphones straight into your drum module and just play off the drum module sounds. That way there's zero latency, you don't have to deal with any of that mentally, and you can just know that you're getting a better sound to the audience than what you're hearing yourself. Or you can buy like an audio MIDI interface. I'll link one down in the description below along with the links to this PCI direct box and that Radial box as well. And that way you can at least monitor what you're hearing and send something to the sound man. But you'll probably need a direct box as well because it goes from 1/4 inch, and then you'll need to send that via XLR to the cable snake, unless there are 1/4 inch inputs on the cable snake. Wrapping up this point, if you don't have a higher end electronic drum set, you're gonna have to rely on VST to get a decent sound, honestly, because the lower end electronic drum sets just sound good enough for practice use. They're not really good enough to use with a live audience. That's just my personal opinion. Some people will have to rely on VSTs. Some guys can get away with mostly just using module sounds. It just depends on what kind of gear you're using in the first place. I want to leave you guys with one more thing before I end the video. If you've got a great piece of gear, you've got a drum set that sounds good, you've been playing with it for like, half a year, it's a great sounding electronic drum set, you take it live for the first time and it sounds like trash, don't panic, because this is a good piece of gear. If you've invested the right amount of money in it, you've got the right stuff picked out, it sounds good because you've been using it. So you just have to do the certain things like using EQ, using compression, mixing a little bit, adjusting the amount of reverb. Doing those simple things can help save your sound. So don't worry if it sounds like trash right out of the box. Remember, you're playing out of a strange sound system. If you switch to a different kind of PA or a different kind of drum amp at your house, the drum set might sound bad for a little bit before you get to dial things in. You just gotta be ready and know the tools to adjust the sound for whatever room and whatever sound system you're playing out of. Hope this video helped you out. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you guys in a few. When really, if they just go over to kit number 2, then they'd have a better sound than if they'd done all the tweaking in the world. Tweaking in the world. That sounds like twerking for some reason. Steven Slate drums, a piece of drum software that you're just triggering